Today we're going to build this custom kitchen island out of white oak with a two-tone finish on 4 eyes. Hey man, I'm going to be doing my voiceover. Can you keep it down?
Yeah, I'm just going to finish, so you're good. I'll be quiet.
Okay. Alright, so for this one, I was doing a custom kitchen island for a client, and there were a lot of things that went into this build, both in the actual piece and in the building process. I thought about editing the video to organize it logically instead of chronologically, but then I decided I wanted to show the process in the way that it actually happened to show all the moving parts. All right, let's get into it. I started by breaking down a few sheets of plywood into all of my panels, and this included the bottom panel and all of my vertical dividers. Everything was first cut to rough size, then I came back and cut everything to finished dimension so that I could set my fence for all the similar sized panels and cut them all at once. With all the panels cut to their finished size, I could then start cutting in the dominoes to connect the vertical dividers to the bottom panel. And a nice way to do this is to use your actual panel as your straight edge. Cut in the dominoes on both parts, and that will ensure that the vertical panel lines up exactly where you have it placed. I also made a quick router jig to cut in some notches for the upper, front, and back supports. So with all the verticals done, I could then start cutting my shelves as well as the dominoes to attach them. And I did this in exactly the same way as I did for my vertical panels. Then dry fit everything together since I was going to be pre-finishing everything before the actual glue up. So with everything fitting together nicely, I could then start working on the edge banding for all of the panels. And for this, I used 1/8 inch thick strips of white oak and attached them with glue and painter's tape. Using blue tape works great, and the best part is you get to make a giant tape ball as you remove all of it. So with the main components of the cabinet pretty much done, I could start working on all of the accessories for the piece, which is when things start to get a little more interesting. I like to think of it kind of like Thanksgiving dinner. The cabinet is like the turkey. Everyone likes turkey, it's fine, but we all know we're all just here for the sides.
What?
At this point, I started with the base assembly since I knew I wanted to have the cabinet on the base before doing the final fitting of the doors and drawer fronts. I could then start cutting all of the base parts to size, which consisted of 6 small legs, 4 equal length side stretchers, and 3 equal length front to back stretchers. parts ready to go, I could start gluing the base together, and I wanted to do this in sections to make it go a little bit easier. So at this point, I just glued the two long sections together. So with the two sections of the base drying and the main cabinet pretty much complete, I decided to put together the two drawer boxes that I needed, which is usually something I wouldn't make until the very end of a build, but I was waiting for the client to make a final decision on finish options. And the drawers were really the only other thing I could do at this point. And this is kind of where the workflow circus begins, with a lot of jumping around between tasks and kind of working on whatever I could whenever I could. As we move along, you'll see what I'm talking about. I used Bloom drawer slides for this, so of course, whenever I use these, it always starts with a little bit of math, but once I had it figured out, I could assemble the drawer boxes as I usually do. They are a simple design with a rabbet on each end of the side pieces and a groove all the way around to accept the drawer bottom. With the drawers done, I think the client at this point had made a final decision on the finish options, so I could then go back to working on the main cabinet. I decided to pre-finish everything before assembly because there were a lot of details happening in the finish, and it would be easier to finish everything while it was still in pieces. You know what else is easy to do in pieces? Building a website with Squarespace. I've actually been using Squarespace for about 4 years now. When I started my furniture business, I knew I needed a website, but I had no idea how to make one. Thankfully, I found Squarespace, and with them, you don't need to be a coder or a great web designer to make a great looking website. And that's because they have a ton of award-winning templates, each of which is optimized to work on a desktop or mobile browser, where all you have to do is plug in your information and images, and you'll end up with a great looking result that will work anywhere. I try to keep my website updated with all of my recent builds. So as you can see here, I'm able to create project pages on my website with just a few clicks of the mouse. It's all very straightforward, but if you're ever in need of a little bit of help, they have 24/7 email support to answer any questions that you might have. So if you're thinking about starting a website, or if you already have one, check out Squarespace to see if it might be a better option for you. Head over to squarespace.com/4eyes for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code 4eyes for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. All right, thanks Squarespace. Let's get back to the build. I then needed to dye one of the end panels with India ink, and this is where I realized I didn't want to use India ink anymore. I was getting a pretty inconsistent look with the black dye, probably user error, but I had seen my buddy Johnny Brook use a pigmented polyurethane on a recent cabinet build he did, and he told me that the finish came out great and had a very similar look to India ink and polyurethane. So I quickly ordered a gallon and went back to finishing all of the non-black panels. So with all of the main cabinet parts finished, I could finally glue it all up. And again, I decided to do this in stages where I glued the inner components together, then glued all of those onto the base panel. With the main cabinet assembled, I could start working on the door and drawer fronts, and I started by cutting all of these to rough dimension, then laid them out from left to right on the cabinet and cut them to final dimension as I worked my way across. Now obviously all of these needed edge banding, so what I did was get them all laid out and fit properly, then cut 1/8 of an inch off of 2 sides of each panel, which would allow for a 1/16 inch edge banding all the way around. At this point, I was a couple days away from delivery, so I needed to be very efficient with my time. So while the edge banding on the doors was drying, I really wanted to get the cabinet onto the base. So I cut in holes for the threaded inserts that would accept the leveling feet. I could then glue the 2 halves together to finish the base assembly. So now I had my cabinet door edge banding drying and the base assembly was drying. So the only other thing I could work on was the diagonal dividers for the wine rack. All of the dividers needed to be pretty much identical, but each one needed a little bit of trimming to get them to fit just right. So there was quite a bit of sneaking up on the fit for these. With all of them fitting nicely, I could then cut them to final width and add some edge banding, which at this point I think you've seen enough of, so I'll spare you this one and move on to the next step. And this was spraying the base black, adding the threaded inserts, and attaching the leveling feet. At this point, I could start installing all of the hinges and the door and drawer fronts and do the final fitting to get all of my reveals nice and even. Then remove all the doors and hardware to spray everything, making sure to keep my hinges organized as they needed to go back to their specific spot to keep everything as I had adjusted it. With the doors sprayed, I could reinstall all of the hardware and doors for the hopefully last time. Of course, celebrate that victory with some tape ball hoops. After hitting the J from downtown,
shoot the J. Shoot it!
The last step was to make the drawer and door pulls, which were kind of fun to figure out. The client wanted simple round knobs, but wanted a small indentation on the underside to grab onto. So I first cut a small cove along the edge of a board using my router table, then asked Greg if he could cut some circles that just kissed that bottom edge of the board to incorporate that cove shape into each pull, and luckily he obliged. Finally, I could get them installed, making sure they were right side up, of course, and this piece was pretty much done. You're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, that piece doesn't look finished, where's the top? But don't worry, the clients had an existing butcher block top that we installed once the island was in their kitchen. Alright, there you go. That was a doozy of a build, but I'm stoked with how it turned out. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this one. And if you want to see some more of my builds, head over to my channel and check those out. And of course, until next time, if your home's feeling plain, especially the kitchen, build yourself an island and it'll look good.